So I'm doing this demo and I realize, like, as I hop off the bike and I'm sort of pointing at things on the screen, I look over and I see my heart rate's like 160. Like, I'm nervous. It's almost like being interviewed, right? Now imagine I'm being interviewed and essentially there's like a real-time graph of my heart rate on the screen. They're playing it cool and I can't tell if they're looking at my heart rate, and I'm like trying to like switch the screens over because, I don't know, it seems a little bit embarrassing. In the end, they're like, okay, this is kind of neat. They did a little test drive and then they flew away. And it was probably, I don't know, a week later or something. And they're like, let's do this. We need you. You want in? Let's go. Let's do this. You need to quit your job.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. Indoor training has been around for as long as I can remember, but it was in 2014 when Zwift came along that it changed this market forever. It came into the world with bold ambitions, reimagined the space and what it could become, and has grown the market to a size that nobody could have imagined. As far back as I can remember, the earliest pioneers in the indoor virtual world space were the likes of Computrainer and Tacx. That would have been in the late 90s or early 2000s. But they never really delivered on the promise of making indoor training much more enjoyable. They can't be blamed for lack of vision or for not trying. The technology wasn't even there yet at the time. Social networks didn't exist, multiplayer online games weren't around, broadband speeds were slow, and wireless protocols such as ANT and Bluetooth Low Energy hadn't even been invented yet. But in 2010, when a gaming software developer in Southern California named John Mayfield began tinkering with his kinetic trainer and finding ways for it to communicate to a virtual world he had built himself, he had no idea how big this would become.
I really got into cycling when my wife was pregnant and we were living like a 1-bedroom condo, and I was convinced like we could just have the kid and stay in this 1-bedroom condo and pay cheaper rent and like save money, right? This is great. Like, we don't have to get a mortgage or anything, but she found a house, we ended up buying it, and about, I would say 100 meters behind the house, there's this cycling trail here in Southern California that's like 30 miles long. It's just a bike trail. There's no cars, there's no driveways, there's no roads to cross. It's just literally continuous pavement for 30 miles. And I just saw like cyclists through the sort of trees off in the distance. Like, what is that? So I went over, took a look, and discovered this bike path. And we ended up buying bikes for me and my wife. And I remember haggling I remember going to the bike shop and like $500 for a bike. Who's paying this kind of money for a bicycle? I think I talked the guy down to like $420 or $430 or something. I got my deal, right? And I would say, I went out there, I did my ride, and I would say by like the third ride, I knew like this is what I'm going to be doing now for the foreseeable future. I love this, right? There's like freedom as getting, I've been a computer programmer for as long as I can remember, and you're just sitting at a desk staring at a screen. And there was something about like being out in the, away from screens, away from people. I'm just on this trail by myself. I never got into the group rides. As odd as it seems, I'm an antisocial cyclist, right? What I like is my solitude. But anyway, I was hooked. And this is like probably February 2010.
Relatively recently.
Yeah. What's weird is I lived in Austin, Texas during the whole Lance era. And like, I didn't know who
is that right?
Couldn't have cared less about Lance Armstrong. And he probably lived 15 minutes from where I was, but didn't even give it a second thought. It was only until I found this bike path that I went all in. I mean, months later, I'm watching Tour de France, and like, I don't know if it was that year or the next year, but I was one of the first people on Strava. Like, I was deep into I had a stack of books read up on all the sort of training methods out there, wishing I could buy a power meter someday. And probably by, I think it was probably going to be October of that year, I had convinced the wife that I needed a proper bike. And I was ready, skeptical, ready to buy I call it a fancy bike.
What was that bike?
I still have it. It's a Specialized Roubaix. It was one size too big for me because it was like they were trying to move this 61 centimeter frame, and I'm more of a 58 or a 56, but I bought it because there was a deal, right? Trying to get that deal again. That took me to the next level, right? I was already on my $400 bike. I was doing century rides around the city, all summer, sort of like I wanted to do a century ride every month or something. I was getting really into it, but the road bike was sort of like, I'm signing up long-term for this, right? It's a big investment. I think it was $2,000 or something, which again, I thought I was crazy. I'm like, $2,000, I'm going to get my miles out of this. And I probably put 10,000 miles on the bike, but I still couldn't believe I was like spending that much money on a bicycle. Like, it seems ridiculous at the time. And now it seems ridiculous the other way, like seeing how expensive fancy bikes are. I mean, 10 plus grand for top end stuff these days. And anyway, got the bike, got deeper into cycling, and then daylight savings hit. And that made it so I was maybe I was doing my rides during the day a bit, but like I've got this new kid in the house, and as my mileage goes up, my time on the bike is going up, and the wife's satisfaction is going down. I'm starting to get the guilt trip of like, you're always out riding your bicycle, like you're a grown man with a kid, and like you need to do your parental duties, please. So I think it was probably November. I went to, REI or some shop here and bought a Kurt Kinetic trainer. It was a dumb trainer, right? A fluid trainer, but on the side of the box had a little power curve. It's like, oh, I could probably use this to, maybe I'll train like the pros, right? Like I had read about. Set it all up, hopped on. 5 minutes in, I'm like, this is horrible. I get off the bike. I literally pedaled for 5 minutes and got off. I'm like, okay, this isn't right. Like, let me Google, like there's some stuff I can do on the bike. I mean, surely this is a solved problem.
Yeah.
And it was the VHS tapes or the DVDs, or like, that was kind of it. Or there was Computrainer. But again, that was the cost of the whole bike to buy a Computrainer back then. And I work in the video game industry. So like I'm seeing the Computrainer graphics, like,
So you were a video game programmer at the time?
At the time, I was doing PlayStation portable games for Sony.
Right. Okay.
So we did like Ratchet and Clank PSP games, and I also did a PS3 game, some Wii. My first games were on Nintendo 64, like back in the late 90s.
Is that right?
So I've been doing games for all those years. Good time to mention it, because that's a key thing here, right? Like I discover there is nothing to do on this bike trainer aside from watch a video of some dude riding up a mountain, which that wasn't that appealing to me. And I've got this background in video games, like maybe I can merge these two things I love. So, I still had the Kurt Kinetic box sitting there because I had just unpacked it, and I see that little graph. I'm like, I bet you I could write some software to sort of decode my speed and give me real-time power output on the screen. And then I can start doing what I've been reading about in the, Racing and Training with a Power Meter book. Like it's kind of like the Bible for Power Meter. So I bought some electronics, glued some wires to my bike. I'd done a little bit of microcontroller programming. So I wrote a little firmware to like read the signal, tell me how fast the wheel's going, convert that into distance, convert that into watts, send it over to the computer. And then I just had like a text program that just printed out my watts. I was like, oh, this is cool. I got data now. And I didn't spend, I spent $200 for this trainer. Now I've got live watts, as accurate as it's going to be, but good enough. I had also, at this exact moment, I'd also been wanting to sort of learn, some like Apple was picking up steam. So I wanted to learn like how to program on a Macintosh, because I knew PC and I knew video game consoles. So I started a little graphics thing, and I plugged in my wattage code and wrote it in such a way that it'll run on Mac or PC. And like, oh, this is cool. So I'm scratching my programming itch, my cycling itch, my video game itch. Like this is great.
How about your parental duties?
I feel, well, so all this work is like 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. every day. And I was on night duty with the newborn, right? So at less than a year old, they just kind of like sleep or sit there, right? They're not like crawling around and whatever. They're sleeping 20 hours a day anyway. So I took the night shift essentially. And, half the time the kid's either down in the crib or he's up in some sort of chair up next to me, while I'm coding at 2 a.m. and hopping on a bike that's going nowhere. By December of that first year, I had modeled a 3D bicycle. I had a road up on the screen, and I was riding around in a virtual world with power data. I started researching, like, how do I save this? I was saving out fit files so we could upload them. I wanted to track the stats, right? And I want to be able to upload it to all the websites that are going to care. And then I think in January, I actually built our first, my first little like steering controller went under the front tire. So now I could steer. So I built software now that could like train me with wattage, right? It had intervals and all the stuff that the book told me I needed to be doing, put me in the right zones. I kind of had an inkling that I wanted to race someday. So I had it like ranking me. Am I a Cat 2 or a Cat 3 or whatever, just on power. I mean, it's just a ego stroke thing. Obviously I had no racing skills, but just on the like wattage tables, like where am I at? Right? I'm leveling up. I want to level up, to a fast Cat 4 or a slow Cat 3. But just kind of building things as they came to me. Like, what do I want to do? I'm riding on the bike. How do I feel? What's the next thing I want to build? At one point, I converted it entirely. There was like a music video player mode.
Okay.
So you had to keep the interval power exactly right, or the video would start to get fuzzy and corrupted, and like the music would slow down. So anyway, I had it so I'd do my workouts, and then the cool downs were all video gaming, because I had this steering controller I built. So it would then convert from like structured training on the road to now explore this world and like collect all the items in the forest.
Oh yeah.
And it would give me a time, you have 5 minutes to cool down, like see how many coins you could collect, which turns out is a horrible way to cool down, because I'm like hammering through the forest to try to get these coins, right? It's just, it's weird how little it takes to sort of get you motivated to pedal harder. Like, I'd see I have 4 seconds left to get this last coin and I'm just hammering. It means nothing, right? But it's like, I want to get the thing. And the steering really helped sort of stave off some more of that boredom when I'm not focused on the power.
Yeah.
Right. It was like, if I'm just riding around, it's fun to sort of explore. So that was all that was built that first winter. And I think in February 2011, I put up a little website that detailed sort of what I'd built. I'd reverse engineered ANT Plus at the time, because they wanted like $5,000 to give you the format of ANT Plus. And I'm like, I'll just like look at the data and figure out where heart rate is. So that's a pretty simple format.
After the first year of building this indoor cycling game, which didn't even have a name yet, John put it aside for the spring and summer of 2011 and got back to riding his bike outside. Once the fall came around, he began building more, polishing up what he had, and began building on top of what he had already started.
I started building user interface, and like, maybe I can customize my bike. Maybe I can do, maybe changing the wheels makes your bike faster, whatever. I wanted to give myself rewards for doing my workouts.
So you were gamifying it at this point still?
Kind of, yeah. Like, part of it was I knew, other people would want to customize their bike if this ever was a thing. I think this is when I was first starting to think like, maybe I'll just release this on the internet and like, give it away for free, right? I'm not the businessman persona. I'm more of the product kind of guy. So I thought that would be cool. Iterated it some more, started increasing, improving the graphics, making it more something that maybe I could actually release. But I wouldn't say it moved a ton that second year. I mean, it's kind of like the beginning of a software project. You make tons of headway, and then as you start doing like the 14th most important feature, the impact is less, right? But you still got to do them.
After that second winter of building the foundations of Zwift, John decided to put what he had built out there on the popular triathlon forum called Slow Twitch. You can read that original post in our show notes, as well as what John had on his original website, which was called JMX Trainer Coach 0.5, aka How to Make Riding on a Trainer Suck Less. It's really quite amazing to go back and read knowing what we know now.
It was springtime, so I was done working for the year and just kind of like put it up just to get some feedback, thinking, maybe I could, sell this thing for a little bit of money, right? $50 a pop, and here's a little thing you could download. And the response on there was pretty, it was more than I was expecting. I was expecting like 10 people to post like, that's dumb, go outside kind of thing. Because, cyclists are tough guys, right? And cycling is serious business, and it's not supposed to be a game, right? So that's what I was expecting. But, it was more of a mix. It was a lot of positive responses. I think it was more I had also posted on a cycling forum. I think it's bikeforums.net, which was where I mostly posted. But I was starting to want to get into triathlons. I'd been reading a lot of Slow Twitch, and like those guys seem more, I don't know about the numbers. They take it seriously in the way that I take it seriously, which is just like, I'm interested in the performance and not so much the tradition of cycling. And, it's just different perspective, I guess. So anyway, those guys really latched on. I'm like, okay, maybe this is my home for a while. It's Slow Twitch. People
saying I'd buy that too.
Yeah, no, the response was pretty good. So at that point, I was like, okay, I probably have something. Let me, I kept the threads alive. I was posting about them more. And I started to get emails from entrepreneurs saying like, hey, like, let's work together and maybe we can turn this into something. And 4 or 5 of those emails came through. And I thought, like, these guys are like, I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it with these people.
What were the offers like? Were they just like nothing in it for you? Is that why you weren't feeling it?
It seemed like there was nobody really serious, or I didn't like the tone, or it was kind of like you do all the work and then I don't know. Some of it's just like you just get a bad vibe, right? I kind of ignored them.
All right, now we're at the point of the story when John's life takes a significant turn and intersects with a man named Eric Min. It was at the end of 2013 when Eric contacted John after doing some research on a similar business idea he had been thinking about. For context, here's a bit about Eric's upbringing.
Well, we're a family of 3 boys. And back in South Korea in the 70s, you had to give up 4 years of your life to military service. No, we didn't take the boat. We took a 747 Pan Am airline and flew over. My first bike was a beautiful orange bike with a banana seat and the long bars. But that was, I must have been 8 years old, and I didn't rediscover the bike until I moved to the suburbs of New York. And then I bumped into a cycling club called the Sleepy Hollow Cycling Club in Tarrytown, North Tarrytown, New York. There were 3 brothers there who ran the club, and they really took me under their wings and taught me a lot about training and took me to races. And that just became, my sport.
Eric excelled at bike racing and even attended an Olympic training camp in Colorado when he was young. He admits that he didn't quite have what it took to become a pro cyclist, so he took a more traditional route and studied in university to get a career in finance. And, well, he definitely excelled at that. He became a VP at JP Morgan on Wall Street, which gave him the insight and experience to create a successful competing business dealing with trading systems for the commodities market served over the internet. It was called Saconet and took him to London, where he settled in and lived until this day.
So I got back into shape right after I got married. And so this is when I started to do indoor cycling during the summer months just to stay in shape, because getting out was so challenging for me.
Eric had similar time restrictions as John and many others, and literally just missed the convenience of what he had when he was riding in New York. He went down the indoor training rabbit hole, trying all the different products out there, which none of them he was really satisfied with.
when I got back into indoor cycling, I realized not much had changed. So I literally went out and bought everything, not because I wanted to start something called Zwift, just because I wanted, content to keep me engaged and motivated. And I had Computrainer, back in the day. They had this, 3D simulator, we call it that. But it never delivered on the promise of like creating this virtual world for cycling. People have been talking about this for like decades.
At the end of the day, Eric admits that it was just a personal need for himself that made him start to look into how indoor training could be more social and be more engaging simply because that's what his life needed at the time.
What I missed in New York City was that sense of convenience and community and competition and training. And it was so convenient because I lived on the Upper West Side, which is 2 blocks from Central Park, a 10-kilometer circuit that I can have access to. In 2 minutes, I can be over there. So when we left New York to go to Germany, I lost all of that. And then when I a year later moved to the UK, I still didn't have any of that. So what I simply wanted to do, it was a selfish thing. I wanted to recreate that convenience, that sense of community, that sense of training and competition.
But as we heard before, this wasn't Eric's first venture, and he had to tick some boxes in order for him to convince himself that this was a scalable business.
Oh, is it a real business? Is it doable? Do you think people will, buy it? Do we have all the resources to execute on that? And, is this the right trend, right? So we had to check all those boxes. And is it global? Is it internet? To be sustainable, it should be a subscription business. My last business as Akana was a subscription business. And I know the value of a subscription business. So the checklist was only done after, yes, this would solve my problem.
So coming full circle to where we left off with John, Eric, along with his former business partner, Alaric Murin, did some searching around the market to see what was out there, and they found John's project on the Slow Twitch forum. Often
Alaric is the one who keeps me grounded, so he's my counterbalance. Otherwise, I think I'd probably go off the rails and dream too big. But so that was a great moment, and we realized neither of us know how to build video games. We didn't know anything about the video game industry, but clearly the experience had to use a video game because it would give us the most flexibility in creating that dynamic, interactive experience that we call virtual worlds now. My first task was, all right, I have to find someone who could be our developer. And I literally Google for, I forgot exactly what I searched for, but John Mayfield's project was the first thing that came up. And I'm like, oh, what is this? And it was like a home project, and I forgot what he called it, but it was a beautiful 3D, cycling game. And it wasn't really working, but it had, I thought, the beginnings of something great. Most importantly, I didn't think too much about the tech, but I wanted John. So I reached out to him. We exchanged a couple of emails. And he seemed interested, but I think I got the impression that a lot of people pinged him because I think he posted on Slow Twitch. But I think I was the only one who actually showed up on his doorstep. I flew from London to LA and knocked on his front door to meet him in person and get a demo and go for a ride. And so he took me probably more seriously than all the other inbound, interests that he got from others who say, hey, let's start a business together.
Now, near the end of 2013, Eric made his way across the pond to John's home in Orange, California to take a look at what he's built.
Next thing I know, he's knocking on my door, asking to come check out the thing. So I, comes to my house in Orange, California, go up to my little home office with my bike set up. And I was all set up, I had already gotten dressed in my cycling clothes so I could sort of demo the software. I had the heart rate strap on so I could show them the data works and everything. So I'm doing this demo and I realize as I hop off the bike and I'm sort of pointing at things on the screen, I look over and I see my heart rate's 160. I'm nervous. It's almost like being interviewed, right? Now imagine I'm being interviewed and essentially it was a real-time graph of my heart rate on the screen. And I'm looking, and Eric brought a guy named Scott Barger with him, and they're both sitting there, and they're playing it cool. And I can't tell if they're looking at my heart rate, and I'm trying to switch the screens over because, I don't know, it seems a little bit embarrassing, but in the end, they're like, okay, this is kind of neat. They did a little test drive. I think they used the steering controller, tried it out, maybe collected some coins and stuff, but they didn't really, everybody was pretty calm. And then we went on a bike ride. I think we went up Mount Baldy, which is one of the main climbs for a lot of Southern California here. Did a little bit of that, and then they flew away.
And what did you think?
I thought like, okay, those guys are pretty cool, pretty nice. Seemed to know what they were doing. Seemed serious enough to fly out here and like check it out. And it was probably, I don't know, a week later or something. And they're like, let's do this. I think we should form a company. We need you. You want in? Let's go. Let's do this. You need to quit your job. Was
that expected?
I wouldn't say it was expected at that point. I think I'm naturally pessimistic. So I just assume like, okay, well, nothing will probably happen from that. Like, who's really going to like put that kind of money into like some random project? And, they came and saw for an hour, right? Like,
what got you over the line with that?
Well, so I call, Eric and I talked again, and he can sell you on a dream. That's one of his skills, right? That's probably something that any sort of entrepreneur or CEO needs, is to like convince people that what you're about to do is doable and the right thing to do.
Eric liked John and what he built, and he knew he needed him to take this to the next level.
You're not going to find many like John who had the skill set to build an engine from scratch. I mean, the engine that we have is the engine that he built over 7 years at another company which we acquired. So he had that technical skill set as a graphics programmer. Plus, he's a cyclist and a runner. And so having that combination, and John's a really nice guy. He's a special guy. He's a nice guy. And, and frankly, I didn't have like a number 2 or number 3. I only looked at John. But after that meeting, that trip, that one day, I put a proposal in front of him, which I thought he couldn't refuse. And within 2 weeks, he had joined, a company. He dropped his other job and came to Zwift, be one of the co-founders.
Now, we can start to see the fundamental ingredients of Zwift are starting to take shape by two unlikely people coming together. Eric, a savvy entrepreneur who's been a lifelong cyclist, and John, a technical whiz who had already built the basics of what Eric had wanted. The two other co-founders in the background were Scott Barger and Alaric Marin. Here's John again about his initial expectations of the partnership.
I don't know what his original expectations were, but when he told me he thought we could have, 50,000 users paying for the product someday, like I was like, I don't know, probably not, but like, whatever. And then to push me across the line, I think he's like, look, if we shut down within the first 12 months, like we'll make sure the company pays the salary. Cause like I was kind of, paycheck to paycheck a little bit there at the start. So
got a family?
Not cause I don't, video games pay well, but I wouldn't say I was the most responsible person or something, right? And we had a mortgage and whatever, a new kid. So like paycheck to paycheck's an exaggeration, but to like quit a job I loved was highly risky to me.
Yeah.
So that took the risk out. He's like, we're not going to fail in the first 12 months, but if we do, like it's in the contract that, you'll be fine, right? We're not going to, I'll give you time to like go find your job again. So he was convinced, right? He knew that was never going to be a clause that got activated, and he convinced me. And I think January of 2014, the company was created, and that started sort of phase 2, I would say, of Zwift, which is the main, that's when the company was founded. That's when we really started to grow.
What was day one like? Was it a list of what the roadmap entailed? Did you guys get together and talk about that? What was the step from there?
Yeah, day one, Scott, Alaric, and Eric all flew to Southern California, and I left my job. It was my last day at my job, Friday at 6 p.m., and I drove to an Airbnb where they were all waiting. Wow. And like literally I had my commute between two jobs. It was like 1 hour between leaving my old job and starting Zwift. But the first night we started getting to know each other, right? I hadn't really met Alaric in person. Everybody's super nice. Everybody's smart. I was more and more convinced each moment that like, this is the right group of people to do this. We probably had some dinner and some beers or whatever, but the next day it was all down to business. It was like, let's start brainstorming what we're going to do. We putting sticky notes up on the wall. Like, what about this? Or what about cycling gyms, or what about running, or what about whatever.
Yeah.
Anything you can think of.
So still there wasn't this is what we're doing. This was still very visionary. What are we going to do type of thing, eh?
The general idea was online cycling where you could race other people.
Right. Okay.
Right. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a brand new idea or anything. We just wanted to do it more like massively multiplayer, not 16 people in a race or whatever. This could be thousands. I would say after that first weekend, one of the biggest main questions we had was, is cycling even the right sport? Which is weird. Like we demoed this thing as a bike piece of software. And then like after the first weekend, my first task was actually convert my prototype to a running product.
Yeah. Wow.
And try it out. So that's what I did that first week after we sort of scattered back to our houses. I converted my software to read a Garmin FootPod. And then I think I got a Microsoft Surface or something, some sort of Windows-based tablet. And I was running around my neighborhood with a tablet in front of my face because I didn't have a treadmill. So I'm like running around trying to like see how good this is. I'm like, this doesn't, I don't know. Anyway, I sent videos to the other partners and gave them my impressions. And like, I think cycling is where it's at. Plus treadmills are huge. How many people have treadmills at home? Like, it seemed like we all agreed like cycling was the way to go. And that was when we started looking for offices in Southern California. Scott actually moved from London to, I think Santa Monica area, for this opportunity. So halfway between where I live and where he lives is Long Beach, California, which also happened to have pretty cheap office space. So that was where we ended up with our headquarters.
That's quite the commitment, isn't it? Like for everybody to surround themselves around you versus, all right, you come to London or wherever.
Well, the premise was like, this is a video game product and there's tons of video game development here in California, right? Whether it's the Bay Area or Southern California. So we thought like, they'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
As it turns out, like getting people at the start is really difficult, right? I mean, you've got video game people working on Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto or big name franchises. Like, are they really going to leave and come work on some cycling thing? Like, the answer was definitely no. They were not, and they did not. So it was hard to scale in those early days. I mean,
how did you convince people?
Quality of life was one of the big things. The video game industry is sort of notoriously bad for hours, right? They don't, it's called crunch, right? Everybody has to crunch. The game is due out before Christmas. So those months leading up to sort of Thanksgiving time, some places will have you working, 16 hours a day. There's also the aspect where maybe you're working on Call of Duty and you're like blowing people up with grenades and stuff in your game. And like, or you could feel better about maybe working on a fitness product that's also games, but you're making people healthier and it's not violent. So there's a couple of angles we had, and I feel strongly about both of those. I don't think I'd want to work on like Grand Theft Auto or something.
So if you're thinking what I'm thinking, this begs the question of how these guys afforded to pay for this to get this off the ground. As we've gone through, this isn't Eric's first rodeo, and he knew this side of the business.
My partner and I, we had made enough money from our last business and we could fund this. So we seeded the business and, and of course we needed to build an MVP that we can then sell to investors. So I had done the whole investor thing once before. So now I do it a second time. So it took us from March. So we set up shop in January, but we didn't get the office set up in Long Beach till March, beginning of March. Yeah, 2014. And we started hiring people for Long Beach. Scott Barger, one of our co-founders, who's with me in London, I asked him to move to California to help set up shop because I was going to stay in the UK. Alaric is in New York, and then we're setting up our headquarters in California. But we put a small team together in March, and the plan was, well, let's get to an MVP that we can then show to investors and then raise money in the summertime. And so, I think I pitched to 200 investors, mostly friends, and then friends of friends and family. And 100 of them invested. So we're planning to raise about 3 million, but we raised 7 million instead.
How do you even value a business when there's zero sales and get $7 million? And how does that even work at that point when it's just a minimum viable product?
I think it's interesting. So this is something that I've learned over time, but I told my friends this company's worth $20 million. I just came up with that number, made up that number. But I think some people just like, are you crazy? Other people are like, okay, well, Eric thinks this is a big idea. And that's why he's saying it's worth 20.
So if you give 20 million, you give almost a third of the company at that point to them. Is that as simple as that? Right.
It's as simple as that. Less than that, but about a third. Exactly.
Do you wish now you said $1 billion?
Well, I think my co-founders thought I was crazy to say it was $20 million. and they're, I'm glad we stuck with 20 because that's really helped us to protect the dilution of the business.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Interesting.
Because that 7 million only lasted us about 15 months. And then I had to go out on the road again and raise another 10. But that another 10 was at $100 million valuation.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. So the name Zwift had been settled on by now, and there's not really much of a story behind it. It was done through an agency. And the beta version was available in late 2014. I discovered Zwift in that time, and I have to admit, the barrier to entry was significant. It worked on a laptop. You needed an ANT Plus key because laptops didn't really have Bluetooth at the time. You needed to do it in a place with Wi-Fi, which back sheds and basements sometimes don't really have that, and tethering with your phone wasn't what it is today. And personally, I felt like a hobbyist just trying to set it up and get it working, and to be honest, I didn't really see the vision, not like they did. It was maybe just a better Computrainer to me. But John wasn't worried.
I wasn't worried about the technology working so much as is more about what you described. The barrier to entry is huge. I mean, you got to figure out what all the pieces are that you need at the, during the beta launch. Like it was only Windows, and I think it might've been only Kicker and Computrainer or something. Like you even had to have a specific graphics card, I think day one, or, maybe it was the NVIDIA brand.
So I was even later than that then.
Yeah. Like we were, we rolled it out pretty controlled, but the barrier to entry is more of a business problem. From a technical standpoint, we were confident when we built, it is beta, whatever, like we were going to learn. We were excited about getting it out there, having people try it on their devices and their computers and start working on it, start making it better. Again, I'm the pessimist of the group. So like I would typically try to counterbalance Eric, who's the strong optimist. So yeah, I thought there are really 50,000 people that want to jump through all these hoops and hook up all these wires and figure out all the stuff they got to buy just to pedal this bike. As it turns out, like it seems like it was such a game changer for people riding indoors that it was worth jumping through those hoops. And there was more people than I thought that were willing to do so. And maybe maybe some of them had their friends come over and get them set up or whatever. But that community was there to really help people out. I mean, it wasn't us having to do all the customer support. It was Facebook groups from other passionate Zwifters helping figure out what you need. And like, my mate lives down the street and he'll come over and like help sort you out. Like it was an amazing community, especially at the start. I mean, it still is, but when you have a group of like 5,000 early adopters, they're really drinking the Kool-Aid at the beginning and they love what's going on.
After the beta launch, Eric and a small crew went on roadshows around the globe, showing people what the vision of Zwift was and what it could do.
It was fun. It gave me an opportunity to reconnect with the industry. And I think there were enough people who were really open-minded about Zwift, whether it's the media, whether it was bike brands like Fausto Pinarello was one of the first bike brands that wanted to be part of Zwift. Of course, all the trainer manufacturers. So I think people didn't really know what Zwift could be, but they were at the same time, they were afraid of not being part of it, because it was just so out there. Rafa, we did the big splashy launch at Rafa in 3 different cities at the same time: London, New York, San Francisco. Looking back, I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but that's how ambitious we were about, like, let's connect the 3 locations all through Zwift and have a launch party exactly at the same time.
It feels like yesterday that Zwift was launched, but the functionality was basic compared to what it is now. This is John describing it.
Yeah, I mean, we had an island. I don't think we were calling it Jarvis Island then, but it was maybe 5-kilometer loop on a little island, and had some different. I wrote some code to make a road. Like, we didn't have any tools to lay down roads or anything for the artist yet, so the whole world was actually generated through like math. So the road was like a math equation, and all the trees were placed just sort of randomly. I think we'd hard coded some buildings and a little log cabin and stuff with the guy playing the banjo up there. But for the most part, it was just like, we didn't have any staff. So I just wrote some code to make a random world, and it didn't have workout mode. I don't think the original release had leaderboards. It was just like hop in and ride. And there's, you're just riding one direction. There's no turning around or anything.
And it was multiplayer?
And it was multiplayer. Day one, you log in, you see whoever else is logged in. That was the core experience.
That was the heartbeat.
Yeah. So people love chasing down the person in front of them, or trying to escape the person behind them, or setting new. Eventually, like, one of the first features we did launch was the timing arch thing. So people could then see, like, okay, cool, I shaved off a half a second, or I'm the fastest person in the world right now. I think we started flipping the direction of the world every few days. So you could ride, like, groundbreaking. You can now ride counterclockwise around the island instead of just clockwise. But it was, everybody changed that one day. It wasn't like you could choose.
Yeah.
It was like Tuesday's reverse day.
What was your thinking about the reality of I guess the visuals? Was it always like let's make this imaginary and keep it imaginary? Or was there ever any debate on whether you wanted to do more real worlds? What was the thinking behind that?
We thought, why be bound by like the limits of the real world? Why we can make anything? Why don't we make the best roads for cyclists? So I think at the start, we knew we definitely wanted made up roads in a made up land. And we also wanted the graphics to not be hyper realistic. I mean, we want our trees to look slightly cartoony and our grass to look slightly cartoony. We're not going for photoreal. We want a little bit of a style to it. But that was one of the main complaints at the start, was like, okay, y'all built this road, but like, what about Alpe d'Huez?
Yeah.
And when you got 3 miles of road built total in the whole product, like, the last thing you want to do is go add Alpe d'Huez. But I could not, it was actually one of our first debates within the company. Is like, Eric is a longtime cyclist, right? And he's knows the story of Alpe d'Huez and how iconic it is. And I'm just like, I don't know, it's just some climb. Like I've seen it in the Tour de France once or something, but like it doesn't have that it factor to me. And I understand, I see that all these people want it, but at the same time, we have 3 miles of road. Are they really going to want to go uphill at 5 miles an hour or 7 miles an hour for an hour? Like, is that where we're at? It doesn't feel like it. Feels like we need tons more flat roads first, and we'll get to that when we get to it. Like, we need to have the sort of the dinner before we can have the dessert, right? Like, let's build the main thing first. And, of course, eventually we did add it once we had that sort of critical mass of roads where people could do smaller climbs and flat rides and whatever. Now there's this Alpe d'Huez map or section that they can go do. And, people do it once a month or something. We built that at the beginning, it would have been a disaster.
After the beta launch, which was free for users, Zwift started charging for the service and began making revenue.
So we launched our closed beta in October of 2014. In the first week, we had like 13,000 people sign up for the beta. We're like, okay, there's a lot of interest here. Yeah. So, and we decided that we would keep it. We were going to charge a lot earlier than we had planned, but we weren't ready. So we decided we're going to have a beta for another year to build it out. And that's when I realized, okay, I have to raise more money. So that's when we went out and raised another 10 million. Yeah, it took us, let's say close to 2 years to turn it into a business that you can start charging, which isn't too bad for any software business. Because if my last business, I think we were developing for 2 years before we got our first $5,000 check. You know what I mean? You're burning through a lot just to get to that point.
Up until this point, Zwift relied on the hardware manufacturers such as Wahoo and Tacx for the smart trainers. They had to be hardware agnostic and basically be Switzerland to this segment of the industry. However, in late 2019, that changed when Zwift announced their ambitions to start building their own hardware. Unfortunately, the combination of coinciding with a pandemic resulting in supply chain disruptions, material shortages, and perhaps underestimating the specialty of hardware manufacturing has put them behind. Eric explains.
Well, the microchips is the biggest issue with supply chain. And, we have the auto industry chasing the same components as we are. So it's just a problem for everyone, and it's causing delays for everyone, including us. But it doesn't change our strategy. We believe that we have to be manufacturing hardware in order to grow our business. It's not to take business away from our partners. I just don't think they'll make enough. That's the problem. And so we're just trying to grow the pie. And so it's going to take as long as it takes. Supply chain, logistics costs, all of this is a real thorn in our business plan. But, it's the world that we live in at the moment. And, there's not much we can do about it other than just persevere and work as hard as we can to get the products that, we have in mind to market. But, it's definitely taking longer than we expected.
How do you balance this tightrope of, you're big, you're powerful, and it becoming this frenemy type of situation where they see you as an emerging competitor to something that you really work together on? I'm talking about the hardware manufacturers. How do you balance that tightrope and continue?
It's a good question. I think the model that we should reference is like, Android. Mm-hmm. Android got started first, worked with Samsung and LG to create the ecosystem, the mobile phones. And then Google decided to make their own phone. And it's a reference product for them, right? But Android or Google absolutely needs Samsung and all the others to continue to manufacture. Otherwise, they're just not going to get enough Android phones out there. So think of that as a model for us. We want to help augment the supply that we think we need to grow the market, right? And we also, at the same time, want to set a reference for our partners to encourage them to innovate.
I imagine it's a difficult tightrope for Zwift to balance. The cycling industry isn't known for moving fast. Not many are VC funded and work on the aggressive timelines that Zwift would need to work on. I asked Eric if this has ever been a challenge for them.
No, apart from our partners' hardware, we're not really tied too much with the cycling brands. I mean, we work with all of the major brands in cycling, and it's more around brand partnership. But I think the future of the world that we're creating, I see the biggest brands and even the smallest brands having a presence on Zwift, a virtual presence. And I think over time, that link between the virtual and the real world is you should be able to flow in and out very seamlessly from a commerce perspective. So it's still kind of out there and in the future, and probably things that an area that most of our partners can't get their head around. But I see that as the future of how we could be bringing a lot of those brands into the space of Zwift.
Yeah.
And they can do commerce inside our space.
It's kind of interesting watching from the outside the consolidation that's going on with Wahoo buying Sufferfest, Tacx, Garmin buying Tacx. If you guys, it's an ecosystem type play. It looks like, and do you think smaller players will be able to play in that ecosystem when you guys get hardware and there's 3 fairly big players out there, or how do you think it will look in the future for that indoor market that has now been defined that wasn't there 10 years ago?
Well, I think, we only care about 3D worlds. So if you want to do something else, then that's not really part of what we're trying to build. So whether it's Sufferfest or, some of these other worlds, which are, videos, recorded videos, that's just not what we offer. But I think, as a hardware partner who may be offering, choices to their customers, Zwift could be just one of the choices. I think it'll, I would like to see more people innovating within our platform. And I think part of that is that we're not making it particularly easy for partners to do that. But as I said earlier, the future of these virtual worlds is, you need to be able to build an economy. You need to be able to, create things. You need to be able to create things that you can own indefinitely, right? It doesn't disappear. You can, the people have asked, can I buy real estate on Zwift? Maybe in the future that is a real possibility.
People have asked that.
Yeah, people have asked that.
Is that right?
I think it's the higher the Hilton said they would pay to have their hotel in our Richmond map, right? So people are starting to understand the importance of having presence in a highly, with a highly targeted audience.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. We're getting into the metaverse stuff here.
Yeah, exactly.
18 months ago, COVID hit March 2020. What immediate effect did that have to the business? Was that a huge stress to it, or were you not prepared for that, but prepared for that type of growth? What happened then?
No one was really prepared for that to happen, but we were well positioned to handle it. And what happened was that we basically had to change our priorities. And our priority was we need to make sure that the system stays up to handle all the onboarding that we need to do. I mean, we just saw a huge rush of people coming in. And these are people who wouldn't have considered indoor cycling, but were forced to do that because training was important. Being connected with one another was important. And we saw a huge influx, and particularly in the lockdown countries of Western Europe. And many of them stayed after, they were able to get back outside. So I'm happy that we were there to provide a service that I thought was very important for them during a period where they just couldn't leave their home. They couldn't ride their bikes, forget about it. They couldn't leave very far from their home. So the idea that they can train and compete with others around the world, in the confines of their home was an important service that we could offer. Did that change our business? Yeah, absolutely. It doubled our business. And so that was a very important moment for us.
Did it change the direction of the business, or did it just accelerate the targets?
No. In some ways, it actually slowed us down because we were so focused on servicing our existing customers. So our product roadmap had to be delayed. When you're doubling the business in a short period of time, it's like it's all hands on deck to make sure that customers are served. The other thing that we did do at the same time was to host the virtual Tour de France, an opportunity we just couldn't, say no to.
Oh, yeah.
And so that also was a huge opportunity moment for us. And just to get our brand out there, the TV coverage that comes with it. And that, of course, impacted other priorities that we had planned. But the knock-on effect, the upside of that is that, we got to then do something with the virtual Olympic series, right? The IOC. It helped us to secure the World Championships, last year. And so those are all the bets that we took that gives us the ability to have those conversations with some of the biggest sporting bodies in the world, because we demonstrated that we could, have all these events virtually. The athletes are, the Tour de France, men and women, virtually broadcasted, and we didn't have any issues. So that was an important moment. And on the back of that, we also did our Series C. So, and the funding is important to keep the business going. So a lot of balls in the air, but none of them were dropped really, except for us having to delay our roadmap. I know that some of our core customers are frustrated by that, but it's because we have the funding that we can do those other things. Constant balancing act there.
At the beginning of 2020, we saw the first signs of Zwift possibly faltering, albeit very quietly, as everyone's attention was turned to the pandemic. Layoffs of many employees was a surprise, especially senior execs, which signified some intentions and perhaps a correction within the company. This included their head of partnerships, who they let go as a commitment to their hardware focus, since they wouldn't need those partnerships anymore. Their head of e-com was also let go, as they wouldn't be selling trainers anymore. Also, their head of running and head of esports, which was a massive ambition for them, was also let go. All of this was as they were closing their $450 million funding round, which they needed to signify their clarity and direction. I asked Zwift for comment on this statement, and they say it's incorrect. They say that third-party hardware remains a focus for them, and the changes are made to restructure the business to support continued growth in the software business. You can read that full statement in our show notes. You might be wondering why this is even worth mentioning, which will probably be seen only as a minor speed bump in Zwift's overall journey. I'm not bringing this up to throw shade on Zwift, but if we're documenting Zwift's story, this is actually a pretty big challenge worth noting at this point in time. And I can understand why Eric probably wouldn't want to go too much into this with me, but from everything I've gathered from various people, it makes it sound like Zwift is backpedaling, so to speak. From multiple sources close to the situation, Zwift's attempt at manufacturing their own hardware is not going overly well at the present moment. This is a significant strategic step for Zwift, and at the time of publishing this podcast, that is October of 2021, I'm told their hardware development program is currently in difficulty. That's not to say that it will fail, it's just that they need to figure it out, perhaps by acquisition. When you think about it, it's not hard to see why hardware would be incredibly important to Zwift and their growth ambitions. I mean, ease of onboarding and setup experience to compete with the likes of Peloton, who are valued at over $30 billion. That would mean a lot to Zwift. Also, recurring revenue subscription is a wonderful business model, but it takes time to recoup those customer acquisition costs. A hardware sale on top of this brings forward these margins. But this is me editorializing, and again, you can read Zwift's statement that reaffirmed their dedication to working with hardware partners in our show notes.
So when you did your Series C, I think it was, $450 million, and it was reported that the valuation of the business was $1 billion. how does that feel? Is that just such an abstract number that you can't comprehend it, or is that a fair valuation in your opinion? And
Well, so we never talked about the valuation. The company's worth way more than that, but we just don't talk about it. But yeah, we're definitely a unicorn. I say this to others. We're just taking on a bigger mortgage, right?
right, yeah,
You still have to. There are expectations, but I'm totally comfortable with the expectations of what that means, and I still think we're in the early years of building this business. This is going to take some time to build. And I need to find investors who are going to be patient about what we're building, what great looks like at the end of that rainbow, and all the investment that we need to make to get there. But if we want to really own the space, you have to invest long term and not really focus too much on the short term things.
Up until the end of 2019, John was the gatekeeper of the Zwift code base and was the head of product. But after speaking with him, I got the impression that what he loves to do is to create new things, just like he did when he was creating JMX Trainer Coach 0.5. What I admire about John is that he doesn't appear to suffer founder syndrome and knows how to get out of the way when it's time.
Yeah, basically through the end of 2019, I led the product team, specifically, like I said, the game that you download and Zwift Companion, right? The apps you get. But in 2020, there was a big push to scale, and I was going to end up in 40 hours of meetings a week. I wasn't going to enjoy that aspect of scaling. We had started to get big enough where it was a pain in the butt.
Was this a pandemic result, or was it just natural organic growth?
No, this is still maybe January 2020, and we had hired a person that had a very specific way that they wanted to help us scale our processes. Right? You need good processes in place, and it wasn't the way that I thought was right. It's not how I've seen video game companies work, that make a product that the designers know is going to be fun, or they think is going to be fun. There's intuition and there's passion built in. It's not about what process did they use to come up with how they design a game. It's these three people are passionate about this game specifically, and they're designing it, and this is how they're doing it. I don't know if that idea really scales, right? So, we hire an expert who comes in and is going to change how the organization works to help us get to that next scale. I don't know. It didn't seem like it was right for me. I never actually wanted us to get this big. I mean, I just want to build something cool for people that like bikes, right? That's my concern. If that's only 3,000 people or if it's 3 million people, whatever. Right. As long as we're having fun doing what we're doing and building something cool, that's all I really care about. But I get that this is the real world, and we got to scale the company and make it bigger and better. And hopefully it allows us to actually make a better experience for more people. And that's obviously the end goal. So I transitioned over to a place I can do R&D work, right? Get back to those projects like the VR game, or this is where I built rowing, was in this R&D sort of role. Just try things that aren't our core thing. They can scale the teams up now to sort of take care of the cycling. And I'll look at maybe an impactful crash bug we have, or maybe a new gameplay mode or whatever, right? More freedom to sort of operate almost like a little mini startup within Zwift, and try stuff out that's maybe years away.
Are you able to get on Zwift these days and enjoy it for what it is, or do all you see are what to do, and how do you experience it?
14 weeks ago, I started training for a half marathon, and I train exclusively on Zwift on a treadmill. And my half marathon is coming up soon, 6 days from now, actually. And it'll be my first run outside all year. So that should be interesting. But I'm on there, 3 times a week, doing my running. I'll switch back to cycling probably after that, and start getting some miles on the bike.
So you can enjoy yourself on it and remove yourself from the business.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in Zwift all the time, test accounts and test servers and stuff, but to ride it like a Zwifter, it's been a little while. I've mostly been trying to ride outside and rekindle the passion for cycling, specifically after I get through with this run phase of my training. Because I've still got to train to be a triathlete someday.
Yeah. Do you ever take the time to just sit back and look around and see what you've achieved and been an instrumental part of? Is that happened yet, or can you do that?
Yeah, I've done that. It's a bit bittersweet. I really liked like I said, I'm really nostalgic for those early days where it was a small startup, and I really enjoy that. So I'm kind of like less impressed with how big we've gotten. Like that's not really the goal, but that's not to say I don't sit back and be like, wow, I can't believe there's like, I'll log in, there's 27,000 people I can ride with right at that moment. Like that's kind of cool. Right. And, I was at like a home repair store the other day, and this lady had a little bike badge on her name tag. It was helping with some, I don't know, curtains or something, shades. And I was like, oh, cool bike thing. And then she was telling me about her friend just got injured. And so they started riding on this software. And it turns out like she had ridden Zwift, and she knew who I was. And like, it was weird. I'm there buying shades from her. I was like, wait, are you John? Like, oh my gosh, like this is super cool. This has totally helped us through our recovery. And, our friend got hit by a car 3 months ago. And like, this is how I found Zwift. And it's kind of cool when you have those moments. I used to have that in the video game industry when you go to, the store and you see your game on the shelf and like, you're kind of standing by it like, hey, I made this. This is probably as close to those moments as I get. Or if I go to Kona, it's fun to interact and hear what people think about Zwift, or what their next feature request is. I kind of like hearing like what people want and what, they care about so much. Like that's the one thing they want to tell me about is this one little feature. But I never had the aspirations for it to be so big.
I read on Slow Twitch something you put on in 2012, and I just want you to reflect on this statement. I'm guessing no companies consider it financially viable or something to spend money on for graphics programmers. Everything that's come out so far is visually pretty poor. Anyway, I'm just a dude with kids, full-time job, normal training load, not much of a threat to a company with a bit of resources behind it. There's multiple levels of irony there, with the financial viability, I'm just a dude with kids, and also you're not much threat to a company. How do you reflect on that with a little bit of hindsight, almost 10 years?
I mean, I told you I'm a pessimist, right? So that's the pessimistic view of like, it's probably not going to be anything. But actually 10 years later, I would say to the dude right now with kids and maybe a little bit of free time to make something, like you could still probably release some cool stuff for cycling or for running or for whatever, like, and it could be viable, especially now with the app store and stuff. I don't know. There's tons of things that we haven't built and we will never build that we've thought of, like this would be cool for cycling indoors, but it's not going to be what Zwift is. It's not on our radar. It's, if somebody built it, it would be fine. And I kind of wish like that next person would, build that next experience. And one day a week I could see, delivering newspapers on a trainer, whatever, right? Some little game. I think we even had a Halloween mode once in Zwift where you played Paperboy and threw little objects, kind of like the old Paperboy video game from the 90s. Like somebody could probably build that and make a neat little experience. Doesn't have to be a threat to like Peloton or other big companies like Zwift, I suppose. There's room to innovate still there. So I think I believed that back then. I just didn't want to type that. Publicly pessimistic.
I'm Wade Wallace, and thanks for listening to another episode of Overnight Success. If you have suggestions on a remarkable entrepreneurial story within the cycling industry, Hit me up on our members Discord channel where I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, stay inspired and stay tuned for our next episode.